Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, everybody. So I'll be telling the story of Esther starting from Esther chapter 4. When Mordecai learned all that had happened, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes, and he went into the midst of the city. He cried out with a loud and bitter cry. He went as far as the front of the king's gate, for no one can enter the king's gate wearing sackcloth and ashes. In every province where the king's command and decree has arrived, there were great mourning among the Jews, fasting, weeping, wailing, and many sat on sackcloth and ashes. Queen Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her. She was deeply distressed. Then she sent Haman to clothe Mordecai and take away his sackcloth away from him. But he did not accept. So she called Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, who has been appointed to attend her, and she gave him a command concerning Mordecai to learn what and why this was. So Hathach went out and found Mordecai in the city center in front of the king's gate. And Mordecai told all that had happened to Hathach, and he also said the sum of money that Haman had promised the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the written decree of destruction that was given at Shushan, so that he can show it to Esther and explain it to her, and that he can command her to go into the king and plead the king for her people. So Hathach came back to Esther and told Mordecai's words. Then Esther told Hathach to tell Mordecai a command. She said, all the king's servant and people in the king's province know that any man or woman who will enter into the king's court who has not been called, there is but one punishment, put all to death. Yet I myself have not been called into the king's court for 30 days. So they went and told these words to Mordecai. And Mordecai told and answered Esther, do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all of the other Jews. For in this time, if you remain completely silent, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your household will perish. Yet, who knows whether you have come to this kingdom for such a time as this? Then Esther told him to reply to Mordecai, go, gather all the Jews in Shushan, fast for me. Do not eat or drink anything for 3 days and nights. My maids and I will fast likewise. And so I will go to the king, which is against the law, but if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all Esther had commanded him to do. Now it happened on the 3rd day, Queen Esther dressed herself in robes and went and stood in the center of the king's palace, which is across the king's house, while the king was sitting in the royal throne in his royal house, facing the front of the house. And it happened so when king saw Queen Esther that she found favor in his eyes. So the king held out his golden scepter towards her. The queen went and touched the top of the golden scepter. And the king said to Esther, what do you wish, my queen? What is your request, Queen Esther? Up to half the kingdom, it will be granted. Then Queen Esther answered and said, if it pleases the king, then let the king and Haman come to a banquet that I have prepared for them. Then the king said, bring Haman quickly, that he may do as the queen has asked. So the king and Haman went for the banquet that Esther had prepared. At the banquet of wine, the king asked Esther, "What is your petition?" "It shall be granted to you." "What is your request?" "Up to half the kingdom it shall be done." Then Queen Esther answered and said, "My petition and request is this: if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king, then let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said." Meanwhile, Haman decided and plotted against Mordecai. That night, the king could not sleep. He found out about the good deeds of Mordecai, and he honored Mordecai. So, the king and Haman went to dine with Esther. And on the second day, at the banquet of wine, the king asked Esther, "What is your petition, Queen Esther?" "It shall be granted to you." "What is your request?" "Up to half the kingdom it shall be done." Then Queen Esther answered and said, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given at my petition, and my people at my request. For we have been sold to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Had we been sold to be male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue. Although the enemy cannot compensate for the king's loss." So King Ahasuerus got up and answered Queen Esther, "Who is he? Where is he? Who would dare to do such a thing with his heart?" And Queen answered and said, "The adversary and the enemy is this Haman." So Haman was terrified before the king and queen. The king arose with wrath, and he was in the banquet of wine, and he walked out to the palace garden. But Haman stood there, pleading to the queen, for he saw that evil has been determined against him by the king. When the king returned back from the palace garden to the palace of the banquet of wine, Haman had fallen across the couch where Esther was, pleading her. The king saw it and asked him, "Will you even assault the queen while I'm in the house?" As soon as these words came out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Now, Harbona, one of the king's eunuchs, said to the king, "Look, gallows, 50 cubits high." Haman had made them for Mordecai, who spoke good of the on the king's behalf, is standing at the house of Haman. Then the king said, "Hang him on it." So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath subsided. On that day, King Ahasuerus gave Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, and Mordecai came before the king, for Queen Esther had told the king how he was related to her. Then King Ahasuerus took his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai, and Esther appointed Mordecai over the house of Haman. Now Esther spoke again to the king. She fell down at his feet and implored with tears to counteract the evil of Haman the Agagite and the scheme which he has devised against the Jews. The king, he then stretched out his golden scepter towards Esther. And Queen Esther arose and stood before the king and said, "If it pleases the king, if I have found favor in your sight, and if it seems right to the king, and if I am pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to annihilate the Jews in all of the king's province. For how can I endure the evil that will come to my people? Or how can I endure the destruction that will come to my countrymen? Then the king Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and Mordecai the Jew, "Indeed, I have given Queen Esther the house of Haman, and Haman has been hanged because he tried to lay hands on the Jews. You yourself write a decree concerning the Jews, as you please, in my name, and seal it with the signet ring of the king. For anything written in the king's name and sealed with the king's signet ring, no one can revoke." Thank you.